From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern.
After weeks of protests, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu bends to pressure and announces a delay to a controversial judicial reform program. What does it mean for relations with the U.S.? We'll discuss straight ahead with our panel.
And another school shooting, this time in Nashville. 6 people killed, including 3 children. The shooter, a 28-year-old woman, according to the police.
There are a number of people who did not make it, including children. It's heartbreaking.
Congresswoman Haley Stevens, who is on the House's Education Committee, will be with us.
And the New York grand jury investigating former President Donald Trump reportedly back today after Trump held a rally in Waco, Texas over the weekend. Where things go from here, we'll discuss with our political panel. But we start now, of course, with our reporter roundtable, and we're going to get to the Donald Trump story. There's a lot to talk about there, Anne-Marie, but think back to where we ended the week on Friday with big questions about where the banking system stood going into the weekend. We actually have some answers today. The market certainly reacted well.
Certainly.
The remnants, the carcass of SVB is sold, and the government is suggesting it'll back up further banks if they need the help. Probably
feels very good for regulators as they're about to go get a grilling in Congress this week, first with the Senate and then with the House.
The big banking hearings this week, but of course, you know, there's always room for breaking news, Anne-Marie, and we certainly got some today from Israel. That's where we're going to start here. Benjamin Netanyahu speaking a bit earlier and invoking the term civil war as he backs off from this idea of reforming the judiciary. Let's listen.
When there's an opportunity to avoid civil war through dialogue, I, as Prime Minister, am taking a time out for dialogue. I give a real opportunity for a real dialogue. We insist on the need to bring about the necessary corrections in the legal system, and we are given an opportunity to achieve a broad consensus. This is a very worthy goal.
Let's get into it with our reporter roundtable, including Bloomberg's Deputy Managing Editor for U.S. Government and Economics, Wendy Benjaminson. And we're joined today at the table by Bloomberg White House correspondent Jordan Fabian. Jordan, I'm going to start with you because this was a busy weekend for the White House, not only because of banking, but directly involved in this matter with Benjamin Netanyahu. Tell us how directly, to the extent that the White House tried to thumb the scale on this.
Well, the president spoke directly with the prime minister a couple of weeks ago, conveyed his concerns directly about the fallout of this judicial reform push. And officials from the U.S. government were in touch with their counterparts on the ground as well, conveying the message. And there was a statement out on Sunday, I believe, from the National Security Council that doubled down on their warning. So pretty unusual to hear this pointed a criticism from the U.S. government toward an Israeli government, especially about a domestic issue.
Yeah, we have that quote now. We're deeply concerned by today's developments out of Israel. We continue to strongly urge Israeli leaders to find a compromise as soon as possible. But Benjamin Netanyahu, all he is saying is we're going to take a timeout, a pause. That does not look like a compromise that this White House would like to see, is it? That's not. He's just pumping the brakes.
Right. So this spares the White House an immediate headache. But the Knesset, the Israeli legislature, is going to reconvene sometime in the next few weeks. And this problem, again, rises to the top. And so the question is, how does Netanyahu get some kind of deal that both satisfies his far-right coalition partners and also the Israeli public, 60% of whom are against this as a whole? And you saw the anger on the streets out there.
Well, it stopped the economy.
It stopped the economy. The international airport was shut down. The embassy in Washington here and around the world were shut down. So Bibi seems to have painted himself into a corner here with no easy way out.
Hold that thought here. I spoke earlier today on Bloomberg Sound On the radio with Joel Rubin, the president of Washington Strategy Group, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, about whether this is actually a done deal. To your point, Jordan, listen to what he said.
The Histadrut, the labor union of Israel, the top business leaders, military leaders, everybody's out on the streets protesting. So he understands this is a moment he can't push. So he's going to try to regroup, strengthen his base, and then push it through after the Passover holidays.
So where are we after Passover, to his point? Is this something that the White House is prepared for?
They have to be if they're not. I mean, they have to know that Prime Minister Netanyahu, it's someone who is, by the way, is a known entity to Joe Biden, someone he's worked with for years, is not one to back down. And so he has to know and be prepared that this is going to come up. He's going to push for this again. And they have to come up with some sort of policy option maybe to discourage it. But if you look at what's happened in the past with the White House, they have not been able to really deter Prime Minister Netanyahu from doing things they don't like, going back to President Barack Obama.
Wendy, that's how the executive side is dealing with it. How do you think congressional lawmakers deal with this? Because remember, during the Trump administration, a lot of Republicans warmly, really cozied up to Bibi.
Absolutely. And Bibi, his nickname, of course, Bibi really doesn't care that much what Americans think, particularly, and this is the surprising part, he cares less than previous prime ministers about what American Jews think. He thinks that we're largely secular, that we've intermarried ourselves out of relevance. I read he said that somewhere. And it is the evangelical Christians who tend to be Republican.
And very Orthodox.
And very Orthodox Jews. But in the numbers, there are many more evangelical Christians in this country than there are Orthodox Jews. And, that's who Bibi will be listening to. So Republicans may want to soft pedal not only for that reason, but to not be Joe Biden.
We woke up thinking we'd be talking with you about banks today. Pretty major headline over the weekend. SVB sold. Markets feel good about it. The U.S. says it's ready to backstop smaller banks if need be, help First Republic get something taken care of. I'm actually surprised, I don't know about everyone here, that the president didn't come out before the bell to say that there's no contagion and I solved the problem. He did 2 weeks ago. We haven't really heard from him since on this.
Right. I think it's probably because he thinks, well, I said that. I never thought there was any contagion. There isn't any contagion.
Is that the feel in Washington, though? And if that's the case, we're not going to get any new regulations. There'll be no progress on Capitol Hill if they think it's been solved.
Oh, I don't know. I think they see some opportunity here. There will be a hearing tomorrow. Interestingly, the CEO of Signature Valley Bank will not be at the hearing, so they don't get to grill the one guy who may have the answers.
That's not at all surprising.
Not at all. But there will be a lot of talk, and what Congress still wants to do is put some oversight over the Fed, which is highly unusual. The Fed is supposed to be independent. But we have Rick Scott, a Republican, and Elizabeth Warren, a Democrat, behind a bill that would do just that. They want to do something about the FDIC limit of $250,000, either keep it, lower it, or raise it. Yeah. And then they do want some more, they want to put those banking regulations back that the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress rolled back, that Democrats say is responsible for what happened.
Who would you rather be tomorrow, Marty Grunberg or Michael Barr?
Oh, gosh.
I wouldn't want to be Michael Barr.
I wouldn't want to be Michael Barr either, not at all.
I mean, this is going to be Fed scrutiny, right? To your point. The FDIC is going to be watching this.
This is the third almost supervision scandal, I would say, that the Fed has taken in-house. And really for the first time, you've seen Congress say, well, potentially enough is enough. We need to get more involved.
I also wouldn't like to be the San Francisco Fed right now, who Michael Barr could throw at.
Certainly. Yeah. We have you both here, so we also want to talk about what happened over the weekend in Waco, Texas. Jordan, you covered the former president. This language almost feels more incendiary than ever before, talking about death and destruction. Now he's going out, kind of a change of 2016 when he ran, which was, I'm going to fix your problems. He's now bringing his problems to his rally and saying, we're going to fix my problems together. Obviously, he's talking about his indictment.
That's right.
Potential.
Right. And look, President Trump is someone who campaigned on personal grievance for years. And so this was sort of like the text of that, with an indictment looming over his head. And what he tries to do with his supporters is make them feel like his problems are their problems. So you heard him say, they're going to come after me, but wait, the prosecutors are also going to come after you. And so this is a message that resonates strongly with his supporters. The question is it going to resonate with enough Americans, and not only that, but just enough Republicans for him to be able to win the nomination again? And we'll see if that's
I think over the weekend, the one person he clearly is worried about is Governor DeSantis, because that was the Republican he made a ton of comments about.
That's for sure. To see January 6 footage being played to the crowd as if it was a good thing was remarkable. We'll talk about that more with our political panel.
Yeah, a lot more on this weekend with Trump at Waco. Our thanks to Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian and Wendy Benjaminson around our table this evening. Coming up, posturing on Capitol Hill as lawmakers dig in on the debt ceiling.
What Joe Biden needs to realize that I'm willing to have this battle over the debt ceiling, that this is a battle we should have today, that we shouldn't pass this on to my grandchildren.
More on that conversation still ahead with Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens. That's next. This is Balance of Power. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television. Following a tragic shooting at a private school in Nashville, President Biden is renewing calls on Congress to ban assault weapons and tighten gun laws. He spoke earlier today at the White House.
And we have to do more to stop gun violence. It's ripping our communities apart, ripping the soul of this nation, ripping at the very soul of the nation. And we have to do more to protect our schools so they aren't turned into prisons.
Joining us now from Capitol Hill is Michigan Congresswoman Haley Stevens. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. We know you're on the Education Committee, and obviously, when you hear news like this, last year Uvalde, this year Nashville, and countless others in between, and people like Joe and I constantly ask lawmakers what can be done, and nothing ever happens. But we have to ask it one more time, Congresswoman. What are you hearing on Capitol Hill? Can anything be done?
Well, we're heading into vote shortly, and I fully expect a conversation with my colleagues. I'm getting together with colleagues from both sides of the aisle later tonight, some who are from Tennessee, and I know this is going to come up. And this has become very personal for us in Michigan. We had a school shooting at Michigan State University 14 months after a high school shooting in Oxford, Michigan, in the very county I represent. And our state has moved aggressively to put into place common sense gun safety measures. And the reason why we push to pass laws, and the reason why I'm heeding the direction of our president, is because when you pass laws, you change culture. And unfortunately, assault weapons have seen their day in this country. We've got to push pause. We've got to implement safety standards. And we've also certainly have to address mental health. I'm waiting for answers alongside all of you on what happened today in Tennessee at this school. But one of the things that we know, 3 school children aren't going home to their parents. Multiple adults aren't going home to their families. It's unacceptable. We need to be focused on other matters, but until we can handle this, the #1 killer of kids can't be gun violence, common sense gun safety legislation now.
But Congresswoman, with all due respect, we have to be honest here, right? During a period of time in which Democrats controlled Capitol Hill and the White House, a bill was passed. The president signed it into law, that red flag law, which was much less than Democrats wanted to see. And we all know there's no appetite on the Republican side of the aisle to do anything now, right? This is not going to change anything.
Yeah, and Joe, I'm thinking creatively. I'm thinking deeply. I'm part of that gun violence school generation. I was in school when Columbine happened. I was finishing school when Virginia Tech happened. I was working the Obama administration, just finishing up my service there when Sandy Hook occurred. It's not acceptable, right? And so how do we have wraparound services? How do we stop these school shooters before they even get close to the school? What is taking place? And so we've also got to change our reaction to these school shootings. Certainly laws. I'm here in the nation's capital. I'm a firm believer in tightening our gun laws in this country, but we've got to do more. We've got to dig deeper. It's all hands on deck, and we've got to stop pointing fingers.
When you go into the election ahead of 2024, you have potentially, people are talking about a recession ahead, inflation very high. Do you think something like gun safety will resonate with voters?
Well, I certainly think it impacts our competitiveness, right? I'm on the select committee on China competitiveness. And as we look out at the global stage, the rest of the world just scratches their head at why this is a repeated problem in America. And this is very palpable. I've walked alongside Moms Demand Action volunteers, mothers crying to me that they're scared to send their kids to school. In fact, I just heard from someone yesterday who's scared to start a family because of these indicators and this reality and the fact that lawmakers are just so resistant to do anything. And you look at the gun lobbying that takes place, you look at the manufacturing of assault weapons in this country, you look at the culture wars that are taking place. Come on. If you care about safety for our kids, you can make a move. You can pass a law. You can tighten background checks. You can put that ban back on assault weapons. We're also looking at the magazines and the ammunition as part of the solution. And we can all say, we're gonna stop being a part of these culture wars, and we're gonna focus on the result of minimizing gun deaths in this country.
The president talked about schools as prisons, Congresswoman. I do wonder your thoughts on that, because the Republican answer to this is to arm teachers, for instance, and get more police in schools. What's your answer to them?
I think the data speaks, right? More guns are not producing better results. If that was the case, then America would have the lowest gun violence of any nation in the world. And unfortunately, we have the highest of any industrialized nation. And so this is something that we've got to reckon with. We've got to be ferocious. We've got to think boldly. I certainly want to hold my colleagues accountable who are stalemating the legislation that we need to pass. And I also want to dig deeper. We've got mayors who are leading. We've got a governor in Michigan who is leading, who made this a part of her inaugural address at the top of this year and has moved swiftly in the state of Michigan. That's going to make the difference for us, and that's going to enable us to compete.
When we talk about competition, Congresswoman, you mentioned you're on the China Select Committee. Obviously, last week, the TikTok hearings were front and center. We do know that Senator Mark Warner and John Thune's bill is gaining traction. Now, it doesn't mention TikTok explicitly, but it could go after a company like TikTok. Where does the support for that kind of legislation, like that bill that now has White House support, where does the support lie in that in the House?
Yeah, I think the president has been very consistent on legislation. I know that there's a variety of different views on the House side, some that are really quite extreme and might get into First Amendment conflicts. I personally think, though, that we've got to take a hard look as lawmakers about what their surveillance looks like. The other hearing that took place last week in Washington with our Select Committee on China was regarding the forced labor camps and the persecution of the Uyghur population, a Muslim group of individuals in the northwestern part of China that are being absolutely persecuted, and the technology that China is implementing is enabling those attacks and forced sterilization and imprisonment, and it's not acceptable. And so we've got to look at what that means when we're flirting with this technology and have this hyper intertwined economy between the United States and China. I represent a manufacturing destination. I know we're selling to markets all over the world. I know we've got manufacturing over in China. I want to source that back into the United States. I want to be aggressive, and I don't want to be pushed around based on practices that aren't democratic and that are bad for democracy and for freedom.
Yeah. Congresswoman, are Democrats going to get pushed around when it comes to the budget? I have to ask you about this. On Friday, we spoke with Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas here on Balance of Power. This is what he had to say about managing the negotiation on spending and the debt ceiling. Listen.
We need to use it. We need to use that as a lever to pry the budget out of Joe Biden's hand. We're never going to get ahead of inflation as long as Joe Biden is borrowing my grandchildren's money and then printing dollar bills through the Fed.
When will the House begin negotiations with this White House, Congresswoman?
Well, it's interesting, and with all due respect to Mr. Marshall, I think if you replace President Biden with President Trump, I don't know if he'd be saying the same line. Obviously, the debt and deficit has been a problem for a very long time. It is something that we've got to reckon with. I certainly am pleased to be the first millennial that Michigan ever sent to Congress. I want to reckon with the debt that our country has been saddled with, that we're looking that is going to go on to the next generation. But it's not going to be by flirting with allowing America to default on its debt. That's exactly what China wants. That's exactly what our competitors want to see. They want to see our system not work. What we need to do, and I'm in the Problem Solvers Caucus, is we need to have ruthless conversations and come up with results about some of our permanent costs and some of the other costs. President Obama was working on this, efficiency of spend in our government, things that pay dividends back into our Treasury, like the CHIPS and Science legislation that I was so pleased to author last term in the Congress and see get passed into law.
Congresswoman, we thank you. Pointing to ruthless conversations on Capitol Hill, Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens. Coming up, financial regulators preparing to face tough questions this week on Capitol Hill.
Why did they ignore interest rate risk? They ignore the fact that there is over $600 billion of unrealized losses in our banking system.
What to expect from congressional hearings on the banking sector. They start tomorrow. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. Thanks for joining us. Are you ready? All eyes on Capitol Hill tomorrow as Congress kicks off 2 days of hearings on failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature. Lawmakers are just getting to this now with more on the autopsy. Kaylee Lyons is here. Hey, Kaylee.
Well, it's been a rough couple weeks, but it does seem like the mood music into these hearings has gotten a little bit better. Finally, the FDIC found a buyer for Silicon Valley Bank, First Citizens taking over those assets, and there's been reporting from Bloomberg over the weekend about measures authorities could take to help First Republic shore up its balance sheet as well. So you actually saw a nice rally for those stocks today. That doesn't mean there's not going to be some tough questions asked of the three testifying in the Senate on Tuesday and then in the House on Wednesday. We've gotten some of that released testimony. Michael Barr, the vice chair of the Federal Reserve's supervision, talking about essentially what went wrong, the inquiries the Fed is now doing into this, and talking about the need for regulation to maybe be altered. Same thing with Marty Grunberg, the chair of the FDIC, also addressed how prudential regulation may need to change because of these failures. And we'll hear what Nellie Lang also has to say. No testimony from her yet. But basically, the topics are going to be: what role did the 2018 rollback play in these failures? How may regulation and, more importantly, supervision need to change? Also, when it comes to the FDIC, what about that insurance cap? Should it be raised? How would that be paid for? These are some of the questions we are expecting to be asked.
Okay, you brought up a good point all week, which is that even if they were to change the insurance cap, it's not going to help any bank immediately.
Well, all these things take time, right? We know policy moves slowly. And in the meantime, you are still seeing deposit flight evidenced in the data from some of these smaller lenders to the larger players. So I'm sure there will be some questions asked about how best to prevent that in the meantime.
Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons, thank you so much, and she'll be up on the Hill tomorrow covering those hearings. And coming up in the program, the state of our supply chains. We'll talk to the Port of Los Angeles' executive director. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. Global supply chains are slowing down and volumes are dropping at U.S. ports from the backlogs of the post-pandemic days. For more on this, let's bring in Jean Seroka, Port of Los Angeles Executive Director. Jean, thank you so much for joining us. You're here in Washington, D.C. Let's start before we get into the supply chain chaos that's starting to unwind. You're here for more money. What are you asking the administration for?
That's right. How we sharpen our approach on the infrastructure money, whether it's the Inflation Reduction Act that's geared towards cleaner equipment and cleaner energy, or the IIJA, the law that was put into place. $17 billion are designated for ports and waterways here in the United States. I want to make sure that we're a good applicant, that we're a port of choice for the advisors.
This is really interesting because people hear, well, the infrastructure bill passed. That's a lot of money. They sent it all out there, and Mitch Landrieu's crossing the country, taking a victory lap. But it's actually being allocated now, and it sounds like a very complicated process. How do you go through the stages here, and what's left for you in your request?
Oh, there's still a lot left, and that's why I'm here. It's still early days in the cycle of the infrastructure law. I just came from Mayor Landrieu's office where he offered some advice on how we need to be working with the Department of Transportation. I'll be seeing others there this week as well, and making sure that we're approaching this from an applicant standpoint where we're hitting all the marks and becoming, again, in the eyes of those evaluators, the port where this investment needs to go.
What are you doing with the money? Is that the point? You have to get specific on actual projects now?
That's right. And we've got three big segments, Joe, that we look at. The traditional bricks and mortar infrastructure at the port, and now digitalization, right? That to make that cargo flow smoother. Second is that cleaner equipment and energy, because we want to get to zero emission by the year 2030 on our port complex, 2035 with heavy-duty trucks. And the third piece is for our workforce. We just announced on Friday in Los Angeles the new workforce training campus, which is the first in the nation for goods movement. Now we need to get equipment in there so our workforce of the future knows how to keep that up, as well as get the next generation of worker on board at the port.
Container volumes, though, plunged in February, 43%. The only other lower time than that was when the economy stopped because of COVID-19. Do you think that is why the administration is holding back some of these funds?
I don't think so, but it is a cyclical downturn that we did predict. You've got really high retail inventory still throughout the country. The retailers tell me directly they're trying to work down that inventory before the new products come in. But after the
everyone was hoarding.
Everyone was doing a lot of that, and we just kept buying. But it was a mismatch of goods that were in place seasonally versus what we were buying. So we'll get on a more normal cadence of imports and distribution after the 4th of July. We've got to work that inventory down. 1.37 was the latest inventory sales ratio from the St. Louis Fed. That's still pretty high. We'll see about a 20% uptick in the month of March compared to February. So coming off a long Lunar New Year break in Asia, we're starting to see production pick up a little bit.
You said earlier today on Bloomberg Radio that long line of ships that we had been counting coming out of the supply chain crisis has now fallen to zero. What does that mean for the labor shortage that you are also dealing with? Getting actual young people to become truck drivers to bring goods to the last mile.
Right. We had 109 ships backed up about a year ago outside the ports of L.A. and Long Beach. During the first 8 months of the year, we broke records in 5 of those months and worked those ships down to single digits. So effectively, that backlog was gone in August of last year. And then we started to see cargo move to the East and Gulf Coast because folks were worried about our dock workers' labor negotiations with the Employers Association. So you had a combination of two things happening right there. With the cargo flow now, and it will come back, now's the time to make these investments and do the work on the construction jobs, on building the infrastructure, while you've got a little more room to play with on the ground. For the workforce, we've got to attract, recruit, and retain folks in these segments. We're not immune compared to anybody else in America today with looking to fill jobs. But we've got warehouse workers, truck drivers, and administrators like me that we really need to bring into this industry.
You said many cargo owners, though, will not have these contracts with the port until there's a labor deal. So where are you right now negotiating with the unions?
Between the Employers Association, the Pacific Maritime, and the ILW, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, they're at the outer edge of what traditionally has been the longest it takes to negotiate one of these contracts. They're still at the table talking on a regular basis, and more importantly, the rank and file are out on the docks working every day, so there's no disruption to operations.
But, and I just want to bring this up to you, the Pacific Maritime Association said that dock workers are failing to stagger lunch breaks, causing delays. Is that part of some of these grievances to striking a deal?
It's a very minor issue, but that's the view of the PMA, and I respect that. But it has not impacted operations. What we also see as well is that not only is this a coastal framework for the 29 ports, but each one of these individual ports has their own agreement too. This is hard work, collective bargaining, and especially when the two sides have not met formally in 8 years due to extensions that have taken place leading up till now.
How big of a loss is Marty Walsh going away? You lost an important mediator there in the middle of this process.
Marty Walsh hit the ground running as soon as he took the oath of office as labor secretary. We're going to miss him dearly. But his deputy secretary, Julie Su, who has been nominated by the president for the permanent job, was the California labor secretary.
So that brings continuity.
She knows both sides very well, knows us, and it brings continuity to the office.
These industry groups wrote openly to President Biden. We saw him get involved in the railroad negotiations. Do you think he would personally get involved in these negotiations?
To my knowledge, the president was the first sitting president to meet with both sides during the active negotiation back on June 10th last year at the Port of Los Angeles. His cabinet members have maintained great business relationships with both sides. This administration has been involved since day one with the supply chain, as you know, as well as these quiet discussions on negotiations. And they're at the ready at any time. But what I can tell you is that, realistically speaking, with the Labor Secretary, the knowledge that they have there, the difference being there's no hard deadline on this contract compared to what we saw with the railroad industries. So we need to let the collective bargaining process keep working, yet that watchful eye here in Washington is omnipresent.
I want to bring you back for a more top-level view to this infrastructure conversation, to the State of the Union. Listen to Joe Biden just a few months ago.
Already we've funded over 20,000 projects, including major airports from Boston to Atlanta to Portland. Projects that are going to put thousands of people to work rebuilding our highways, our bridges, our railroads, our tunnels, ports, airports, clean water, high-speed internet, all across America. Urban, rural, tribal. And folks, we're just getting started. We're just getting started.
We're just getting started here, Gene. When are you going to get an answer on that extra money from the administration?
Well, he's exactly right. And speaking with Mayor Landrieu earlier, they have projects going now in 4,000 counties across the country. I just want to make sure, as a representative of the nation's largest port, that we get enough to keep building up what we want. And what I've asked the administration is, please, let's not forget what we felt like when those 109 ships were backed up and folks were worried about canceling holidays. We came through on the operational side. Now we've got to come through on the investment, build, develop, and deliver sides.
The West Coast ports are critical. In terms of U.S. GDP, it's some 9%. How much percentage what is the percentage you're asking for this money from that?
Just like the president said, so far it's early days. The West Coast ports have gotten about 15% of the available money. And I'm just trying to make sure we keep swinging for the fences. We move 40% of the cargo. I'd love to see 40% of the money designated for ports, which was $17 billion in the law.
Gene, thanks for the time coming to see us at the table here on Balance of Power. Gene Seroka is the Port of Los Angeles Executive Director, speaking directly to you here on Balance of Power. Coming up, a fiery rally in Waco over the weekend for former President Trump. We'll take a look at the state of the various investigations and count the ways coming up next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
Now, keeping you up to date with news from around the world, here's the first word. I'm John Hyland. Police in Nashville say a female assailant armed with assault rifles shot and killed 3 children and 3 adults at a Christian elementary school today. The 28-year-old shooter, who's believed to be a former student, was shot and killed by police. A female shooter in a mass casualty event is a rare occurrence, breaking with the overwhelming pattern of male attackers in such situations. President Biden called the assault sick and called on Congress to do more to prevent gun violence. Hungary backed Finland's accession into NATO today, ending months of foot-dragging by Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Hungary's move follows Turkey's decision to support the Finnish bid, though Turkey has yet to ratify that. And Hungary kept Sweden's application on ice in a dispute that Orban's party has linked to a clash inside the European Union over the rule of law. Prince Harry and Elton John were in a London courtroom today for a hearing into allegations that the Daily Mail tabloid committed widespread privacy breaches. Parent company Associated Newspapers is accused of breaking and entering into private property, hiring private investigators to bug homes and cars, and recording private conversations and listening to voicemails. The newspaper's lawyers are asking for the case to be thrown out. And a group of National Football League owners are pushing to allow private equity firms and institutional investors to buy stakes in teams. Bloomberg has learned that owners plan to lobby for changes at the NFL meetings that are underway in Phoenix. If the changes are accepted, they could create more bidders at a time when values for professional teams are skyrocketing. Global news, 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Originals, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm John Hyland. This is Bloomberg.
'24 is the final battle. That's going to be the big one. You put me back in the White House, their reign will be over. and America will be a free nation once again.
Former President Donald Trump speaking at the rally in Waco, Texas this past weekend. The signs reading witch hunt behind him, Anne Marie. But it wasn't that. It was the footage of the January 6 rioters prominently displayed on video screens as they were playing this January 6th anthem that really blew some minds. It was new level from Donald Trump last week.
He's no longer trying to run away from it. He's absolutely embracing January 6th.
And
not
trying to normalize it.
Yes, normalize it. And not just people that were outside listening to him speak that day. These were people breaking into the Capitol, what the media, journalists, people on the right and left have called insurrectionists.
That's right.
People died that day.
Celebrated
and he embraced
in Waco.
this.
And quite a location to do it. Let's assemble our panel now. Joining us to discuss Bloomberg political contributors, Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, and Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital. Rick, I know this is not your cup of tea, but what does it mean for the race here? 24. Ron DeSantis is watching this. We've got the latest numbers from Reuters Ipsos. Donald Trump's at 44, DeSantis at 30. Does this move the needle?
Yeah, look, I think this is Donald Trump's plan, right? I'm doubling down on my base. These are the most reliable people. They're loyal to me. I can win a lot of primaries with 35% of the Republican vote. And that's exactly what he did. And by the way, this point you make about not running away from the January 6th footage. Yeah. Tucker Carlson tried to whitewash that footage, and he's like, no, that's not the strategy.
Wow.
Strategy is to actually say it was an insurrection, and we need an insurrection. Yeah. That was the message from this rally, is we are insurrectionists, and we're going to change this thing if I'm elected president.
4 out of 5 Republicans consider the investigation a witch hunt, something that he really tried to hammer home this weekend. But what if it was a Democrat? They would not consider it a witch hunt then.
Well, look, I mean, this is a cult of personality. This is not the Republican Party that you know of. There's a lot of other people running for this election for nomination for president who are Republicans. Donald Trump is a party of one, right? It's all about him. It's not about building the party. It's not about trying to promote an ideology.
Point, he's winning in the polls.
Sure, he's winning in the polls. He was a former president. He won a general election in 2016. I mean, figure that out. And by the way, rhetoric that is identical to the rhetoric he is espousing today. And so he's just going to the tried and true. He's going to what works for him and the people that he supports. There is a smaller base than he had in 2016. It's actually a smaller base than he had in 2020. So the question is, how many times can you keep doubling down on a decreasing base and still be successful even within a party fight?
Jeannie, we know that Joe Biden, assuming he's going to run, wants Donald Trump to be on the other side of that debate stage. This reinforces the reason why, doesn't it?
It does, because it allows him to do what he did so successfully in 2020, what they did in 2022, which is run against crazy. You have somebody in Waco, Texas, defending the January 6th insurrection, where, to Anne Marie's point, people died. They were breaking windows. Police officers were hurt. This was an insurrection at our Capitol. And so what Donald Trump was doing this weekend wasn't adding to independents or moderate support. It's not going to increase his numbers over what he had in 2020. But what it will do is it makes it really difficult for the Republican Party. And that is the issue. And I would just point to the fact, where is the Congress in calling him out? Where are Republicans calling him out? You have James Comer, you have Jim Jordan, you have these 3 big, important chairs of these committees, and they are going after Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, for the prosecution. This is where the Republican Party has come to because of what Donald Trump is doing. It's bad for the party, but it's also bad for the United States.
I want to ask both of you, since it is Monday, the grand jury was said to meet today, Jeannie and then Rick. Does he get indicted this week?
We don't know yet. It's just too hard to predict. But I'll tell you, if he doesn't get indicted this week by the Manhattan DA, chances are he gets indicted by Georgia, he gets indicted by the feds, and what's happening now is going to happen all over again as he tries to use this run for the presidency to buttress his indictment, the political witch hunt, and defend himself. And he's hurting his own party in the process and making it less likely they capture the White House this time.
So we're living in a world here where we could get 3 verdicts, or 3 indictments, I should say, all at the same time, essentially.
Yeah, potentially.
Is that somehow good for Donald Trump? He's raising money. Hey, the deep state is after me. Because remember, we've got 2 special counsel investigations, Fulton County, Georgia, and of course the situation with Stormy Daniels in New York. Or at some point, Rick, the walls start to close in.
Yeah, I think the people who are watching this most closely is not Donald Trump and his lawyers, but Jack Smith and Fani Willis, the people who are prosecuting these other cases, because they want to see how this is going to play out. Look, I actually think the case that's first up in this queue, the one we've been talking about, the Stormy Daniels case, is actually the weakest case of the group, right? A lot of people are just going to look at this and saying this is harassment. It just doesn't come to the level of a former president of the United States, first time in the history of our country, getting indicted, right? Is this really what we want to do as a country? I mean, I think everybody should obey the law, and if it's violated, you should be prosecuted. But in this case, to go after a former president for this reason, especially considering it's already been prosecuted, just doesn't seem to come to that level.
That this is the case.
Right. And so insurrection, trying to manipulate the outcome of a presidential election, things like that, yes. I think those are the kinds of things that prosecutors should be going after if there's evidence.
Rick and Jeannie are going to be staying with us. Coming up, grappling with the aftermath of yet another fatal school shooting. Our political panel will be back with us to look to see what Congress can or should do. This is Balance of Power.
We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country once again.
Assault weapons need to be banned. I'm determined to ban these weapons again. I'm not going to stop until we do it. I'm determined to ban assault weapons in this country. And I'm determined, once again, to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines.
So I call on Congress again to pass my assault weapons ban. It's about time that we begin to make some more progress.
That was just a few of the times President Joe Biden has called to ban assault weapons after a mass shooting since he took office. Now, today, another school shooting, this time in Nashville. 6 people killed, including 3 of them children. Rick and Jeannie are back with us to discuss Washington's response. We know where the president stands. He continuously asks for assault weapons to be banned again. Will this Congress or any future Congress be able to move on this if Republicans and even a slim majority of Democrats have control?
Clearly, these events do spur some action. We got some action the last time we had one of these horrific events, and you could see Congress maybe sticking their toe in the water on gun legislation. And so the question really is, if we've done it before, why can't you do it again? I mean, if it's a definition of an assault weapon, if it's a definition of a magazine, let's get to the details, because you don't need an assault weapon to kill a deer, and you certainly don't need a magazine of 30 clips to go hunting. So why is it that we haven't actually come to grips with what is out there? This is the most popular rifle in America. Sales have skyrocketed over the last 20 years. It was built as a military weapon, and so you don't have to say everybody has to get rid of them, but originally that gun was made for a clip of 5 shells. So why isn't it, if it was good enough for the manufacturer at the time, why couldn't you go back to that?
So what's the reality check, Jeannie? I'm going to guess that you don't see anything happening in this Congress if nothing more than a red flag law could get through. In the last Congress, progressives in many cases were furious about that. They wanted something more comprehensive, if not an assault weapons ban. What's the answer to Rick's question? Why different now?
What's different about it is the House is controlled by Republicans. They are not going to pass an assault weapon ban.
They couldn't even get that done last year.
They couldn't get it passed last year. That was a watered-down version. After Uvalde, those little babies shot in their classroom again today. Let's remember Sandy Hook, when we thought this would go through and it was vetoed in the Senate. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen. It should happen. But how can it happen at a time with the rhetoric going on? They're coming for your guns. I guarantee what's going to happen after this shooting, gun sales will skyrocket. Congress will not act. At this point, all we can do is rely on the states, and those states differ as you go border by border by border. So nothing will happen at this point, and it's shameful.
Yeah, and the only thing we continue to hear is love and prayers, and I think parents especially are over it. I mean, you're a parent, Joe, so you have to deal with this.
Yeah, you'll see a lot of tweets about thoughts and prayers at some point later on.
And at some point,
we'll get a quick pop of rhetoric and then likely not a lot.
Yeah, at some point, kids are just not want to go to school.
We're getting there already, that's for sure.
All right, our thanks to Bloomberg political contributors. That's Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, and Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital. For more on all of these topics, check out our Balance of Power newsletter. That's on the terminal and online. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to speak with Heather Boucher of the White House Council of Economic Advisors.
A lot more where that came from. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power. For Anne-Marie Hordner, and I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.